I wanted us to continue our discussion of the Hebrew language. We're going to have a few shiurim on the special quality of the Hebrew language. And this is really a conversation that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had begun. Starts on page 235. And if you recall, we had mentioned that there's a historical context in which Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is having this conversation. Part of the reason why he wrote Sefer Kuzari in the first place was to act as a polemic against the parent culture, which was an Arabic culture. It was a culture that was replete with Arabic literature, Arabic architecture, Arabic culture, Arabic philosophy. And all of these things were presented to the Jewish community as being inherently superior and more modern, speaking more to the modern man. And therefore, Torah Judaism as a system, as a way of life, was portrayed in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's society as being primitive, as being much less colorful and robust than the Arabic culture in which he was living. And one of the areas which was pointed to demonstrate how the Jewish culture was inferior to the Arabic culture was in the area of literature, both poetry, prose, and even the quality of the language. Arabists always, when you speak to a Muslim in particular, they will tell you that you can only appreciate the Quran in its original language of Arabic, because Arabic as a language is so rich and it touches the soul. And if you only would know Arabic, you'd be able to really see the tremendous beauty and profundity of the holy text. But it went further than that, because especially in the Arabic Islamic tradition, language is a form of art as well as a form of communication. If you notice, a lot of the Arabic, for example, Muslims are not allowed to portray the Prophet Muhammad. You probably know that, because people have been getting beheaded and persecuted for drawing pictures of the Prophet Muhammad, right? Most Islamic art revolves around the characters, revolves around geometric shapes, and the letters themselves of the Arabic alphabet, which are very ornate and pretty and are curvaceous, right? So that's part of the art. And so the quality of the language, the quality of the characters of the Arabic alphabet, all of these things make, and certainly when it comes to poetry, like we had started saying, Arabic poetry is superior. So much so that Jews of the time in the Andalusian Peninsula believe in this idea that there was an inherent beauty to Arabic poetry, that a lot of the Hebrew poetry that was being composed used the same kind of poetic format, poetic meter as the standard Arabic poetry. So it is under this backdrop that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is trying to submit that Hebrew is a superior language. And it's a difficult argument to make. It's an uphill battle of an argument to make. It's almost like trying to suggest that even though the greatest poet, the greatest writer of plays perhaps, in all of human history, it's argued that it's Shakespeare, right? He was able to capture the human experience in his plays. And in addition to that, the prose that he wrote really contained within it, the most beautiful, both from an alliterative standpoint, from the way that it sounds, and also from the message that was being communicated, the most clever and beautiful way of communicating, method of communication that touched the soul. So what if I were to tell you that actually there's some Hebrew poetry out there which is even better than Shakespeare? You would say, sure, show it to me, right? So really, that's really the argument that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is making. I mean, you have some really phenomenal Arabic poets, philosophers, artists, literary geniuses in the Arabic world. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying they don't compare to what we've written in Hebrew. If we've been faithful to the Hebrew language and not been imitative. Imitative, right? You're right. You're better off with Arabic. But if we really preserve our own tradition of Hebrew writing, then the Hebrew alphabet is intrinsically greater than the Arabic language. And this, of course, also, you just, like we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, when you look at the Arabic dictionary and you see the robustness of vocabulary that's contained within the Arabic language, where you might have a dozen words for the same thing, with different shades of subtlety in each word. And in the Hebrew language, you may only have one word available to us to use for that very same emotional state or description of something. So it seems, at face value, prima facie, it seems that the arguments don't hold up. They're not really supported by the facts. And that's why I say that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has an uphill battle to try and prove his point. So we started off by saying that from a historical perspective, and this is really where we left off on the bottom of page 235 in the Kuzari. From a historical perspective, Hebrew was the very first language. It is the language that was used to create everything that exists on our physical plane. And how do I know that? Because when we look at the names that the Torah ascribes to various created things, we see that etymologically they are connected. We have the whole idea of Adam coming from Adama. We have Isha coming from Ish. So we know that man is created from the soil, and that's why he's called Adam. Right? But if you call Adam in English Adam, the word earth or soil has no seeming connection to that. And so therefore you see that English is not the language that was employed for creation. Isha from Ish. Chava comes from Im Kol Chai. She was the mother of all living creatures. Kayin comes from the word Kaniti Ishat Hashem. I've acquired a man with God. This comes from the acquisition. Shet means that God provided a foundation for the world to continue. Noach comes from the word Yenachamenu, that God will make life easier for us, or God will console us. So that's where we're up to. We're up to paragraph number 3 on page 236. Additionally, we have the testimony of the Torah, given by God and written in Hebrew, and our heritage of Hebrew, which was passed down from generation to generation. So, number one, we have a Torah that was dictated to us in Hebrew. God speaks Hebrew. That's God's language. Okay? Everyone in the world who accepts the Torah as a legitimate form of the basis for their religion acknowledges that the original language is in Hebrew. No one denies that. Even Christians don't deny that. We have our heritage of Hebrew, which was passed down from generation to generation, going back to Aver, who received it from Noach, who received it from Adam. The fact that it was Aver's language is why it is called Hebrew, Ivrit. Right? The word Ivrit is because it was Aver's language. Now, we've learned before why Avram is called Avram HaIvri. There are a number of reasons that are offered by the commentaries and by Chazal why he's called Avram HaIvri, but according to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, it's very simply because he's descended from Aver, who is Shem's son. So we want to show his lineage. And remember, for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, lineage was very important because he had this genetic theory that there was a line coming all the way down from Adam to the family line that eventually ended up with Noach, and followed to Noach's son Shem, and Shem's son Aver, and eventually passed down to Avraham, that this was a divine line, sort of genetic line, that contained this elite quality that was passed down to all of Yaakov's children. So that's why he's called Ha'ivri, and that's why the language is called Ivrit, because Aver was the only one who retained Hebrew during the generation of the dispersion and the confusion of languages. So Ivrit was the original language, and when the Tower of Babel occurred, Hebrew was the only language that remained from the language that was spoken originally. The reason why Avram spoke Aramaic in Ur Kasdim was because Aramaic was the language of the Chaldeans. So Avram was an Arami. You know, there's a dispute among the authorities how to understand Arami Oved Avi, which we say, it's a pasuk in the Torah. When a person brings his bikurim, his first fruits, to the temple, he has to express his gratitude. I think we discussed this a couple of weeks ago. But he has to say the words, Arami Oved Avi. My father, well, there's two ways to translate it. Either it's Arami is Lavan, tried to destroy my father Yaakov, which is the way the Haggadah understands it. But the Ibn Ezra and other commentaries say that Arami Oved Avi was, my father was a wandering Aramean. And it's referring to Avram Avinu. And that's the opening pasuk for the Parsha of the Bikurim. Simply, Avraham was known as an Aramean because he came from that area. He spoke Aramaic because that was the language of the place. The language, he therefore used Hebrew as his special language when discussing holiness, while Aramaic was his language for discussing mundane affairs. And here Rabbi Yehuda Halevi details for us that Avraham was bilingual. He had two languages that he used. One language he used for everyday conversation, which was Aramaic, the language of the street. And the other language that he used for special occasions, which was Hebrew, when he wanted to speak about spiritual affairs. The question, of course, arises, where did Avraham get this language from? If everyone in his town spoke Aramaic, where did he get the language of Hebrew? It must have been passed down from him to him from either Terach, his father, or his grandfather, which is really essentially what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is suggesting, that Hebrew was the language passed down from generation to generation as the special language. Yes?
Do you think that's a good basis for people who live in Israel who don't speak Hebrew as their everyday language but reserve it for things of Kodesh and speak other languages to say pass the salt?
Right, well, exactly. I mean, that was what I was getting to. This is the source for it. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is the source. There may be other sources as well. And I'll try to present that for you next time. That there is such a concept that a person should only use Hebrew, reserve Hebrew for holy things.
I didn't mean is Rabbi Yehuda Halevi the source. I meant is Abraham Avinu the source.
I know, I understand. But the question is, how does Rabbi Yehuda Halevi know this? He doesn't. We don't have a source necessarily. I'll try and find you. I'll research to see if there's an additional source that comes before Halevi. But we're working under the assumption that what he's telling us is correct. So if he's telling this to us, that he's the source. He's telling us that Avram spoke Aramaic on the street and Hebrew for holy things. And if that's the case, then this is the basis for the practice that some people have had over the years, that they speak Yiddish, or if they're from Sephardic countries, they'll speak Arabic, or English from other countries, or Russian from other countries, Ladino, right, for mundane things, and reserve Hebrew only for Torah and prayer. Yes, this is the source for it. Yes.
And is this also why we make a distinction between the Hebrew pronunciation we use to daven and Ivrit?
Well, some people do. Israelis don't, or I should say many Israelis don't. We do because we were brought up in a certain way, in a certain educational system, right? So we daven Ashkenazis, and then our conversational Hebrew is a different kind of Hebrew. So that distinction is drawn by many people as well. So this seems to be the source for it. I don't have any footnoting here, but maybe I just want to double check. I haven't had a chance to double check this, but I will double check to see if this is resourced in earlier texts. Yeah.
You were starting to say how it got passed on from his father. We're going to continue on that now.
Well, the reason why I said either his father or his grandfather is if you recall from the first essay of the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Levi had a theory that this genetic special quality that it was contained, that was passed down from Adam all the way down to Abraham, could skip a generation. And because we find so many references in Chazal that Terach was not only an unremarkable person, but that in certain ways he was an idolater, and there are even midrashim to indicate that he tried to have Avraham arrested and executed, his own son, that there are indications that Terach probably did not inherit this special quality. It skipped a generation. And so if Avraham was sort of tutored or raised by anyone in his family, it was more likely his grandfather or some other ancestor. Could have been Aver himself, which is why he's known as the Ivri, because he may have been raised more directly by Aver. But we don't know for sure. Yes?
To go back to what I just mentioned for a second,
Yeah.
do you think that, like, I'm just curious, what's your opinion? Because I could see both sides of it. On the one hand, if you use Hebrew to talk about very mundane things, you could think it cheapens the language. On the other hand, if you're immersed in it, in Hebrew, and it is your whole life, then in a way you are elevating it because you're completely immersed in it.
Right. Well, here's, both of those are very good points. If I'm an Israeli, just last night, I happened to be in the bathroom at the same time as my wife because we have a double sink and we brush our teeth sometimes at the same time. Does that ever happen to you? And I'll say, honey, pass the dental floss, would you please? Or, oh, sorry, I got something on your side of the mirror, I apologize. So now what if I'm an Israeli and I'm speaking Hebrew in the bathroom? Am I violating the law because Hebrew is a holy language? Is it permitted to speak Hebrew in the bathroom, in the washroom? This is discussed in the postscript, and I'll have the sources for you next time. We'll go through those sources, and we'll have that conversation. But this is part of the discussion that Rabbi Yehuda Levi is having. If Hebrew has become your language of conversation, so then on the one hand, you could say, I'm elevating everything in my life, including my mundane conversation. On the other hand, how do you preserve holiness if not by keeping it segregated? So there's the dichotomy there, there's a tension there that is clear. And I don't think that there's one correct answer. Yes, Linda.
So the thing that I'm just a little confused about is the Kuzari is responding to the question of, is Hebrew superior to Arabic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I don't, is there really, if you're going to talk about, is it superior, does it matter? Really, does it really even matter? Because Hebrew, then he goes on to explain more from my perspective of why it's sort of holy, because it comes from God. So to me, it's like that should be the reason in itself. Why we use Hebrew.
It is the reason in itself.
So he's explaining that.
What we had said a few weeks ago, in the very beginning of paragraph 68 on the bottom of page 235, he said it's the most important of all languages, both for historical and logical reasons. So he's presented the history. It's the language that God used to create the world. It's the language that man spoke before the dispersal, before the Tower of Babel. So from the historical perspective, we've got that covered. But there's also an intrinsic quality to the Hebrew language that he has yet to demonstrate has a holiness to it as well. We're going to get to that, to the intrinsicness of Hebrew. We haven't really touched on that yet.
But not just grammatically or descriptively or
yes.
literature, things like
well,
that.
But he is right. He is going to get to that. He's going to explain that Hebrew is as, if not more robust than any other language. And he's going to demonstrate that point shortly. Okay. But before we get to that, I'll do more of a full presentation, Bezrat Hashem, next week when we talk about the intrinsic holiness of Hebrew. And this is, of course, a discussion that translates into a number of. There's a halachic issue in Hebrew involved. as well. Not only can I speak Hebrew in the bathroom, but here's another halachic question that you may want to consider. And that is, what is the best way to pray? You see, if Hebrew has an intrinsic quality to it, then even if I don't understand Hebrew, there may be a benefit to pray in the Hebrew language, because the language itself elevates my words in some way, in some metaphysical way, that I don't even appreciate intellectually. On the other hand, if there is no intrinsic quality to Hebrew, and it's just, as long as I can express myself in any language, it's more beneficial to pray in a language that I understand. Because then I can actually communicate with God in a way that I feel like I'm doing something where I'm intellectually engaged, right? I understand what I'm saying. And this, of course, has advocates on both sides of the coin as well. Is it better to pray in Hebrew without understanding, or is it better to pray in English or whatever other language I do understand, and where I feel I can really pour my heart out to God? And as we're going to see, I'll demonstrate this for you also in the ensuing weeks when we have these conversations, that there's a machlokas here as well. And it could be part of the Maimonidean Halevian divide, from the rational school of the Rambam, who holds that prayer is avodah shebalev, that is the service of the heart. And if the heart is, meaning the consciousness, is not engaged in the service of prayer, it's meaningless. To perhaps the Halevian metaphysical school, which says that even when the mind is not engaged, there are certain activities that are metaphysically, intrinsically important. And that's the reason why they should be adhered to, even when a person doesn't have a full understanding of what he or she is doing. Okay?
Well, you can solve the problem easily with the Hebrew-English siddur. You say the words in Hebrew and look at the English explanation.
Right. You could, but what if you're at a minyan where you don't have time? Like, you can do either or, right? Let's say I go to shul and I want to finish Shmona Esrei in time to go to Kiddush. Yeah. What?
The interline?
You can use the interlinear. Yeah, the interlinear is very good, but sometimes you don't have time. What?
Sometimes you don't have time.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have time. So which is better? Should you say that paragraph in English, or should you say it in Hebrew?
Also, you think sometimes it seems they go so fast, how can they concentrate on the words and get meaning?
Well, come on, Elaine. You and I both. You and I know. We all know that guy is going.
Rabbi, isn't
What?
the daily, the same thing?
Well, that's the whole question.
What did
All
you say?
Tehillim. So many of you recite Tehillim, and you genuinely believe, and I think rightfully so, that there's some efficacy to the recital of Tehillim without even understanding what the words mean. So what does that mean? What efficacy can just saying Hebrew words have unless there's some intrinsic metaphysical quality to those words? And furthermore, let's say you are part of a Tehillim group, and you say to yourself, you know what? I would like to recite Psalm 23, which resonates with me. I'd like to recite it in English instead of Hebrew. And then the leader of the Tehillim group says, oh no, that won't do. We only allow Hebrew Tehillim to be recited in our Tehillim group. Is that a legitimate argument, or is that an illegitimate argument?
You know, if that was true, that means anybody could say Tehillim. If the value is in the words itself, anybody could say it. Take somebody off the street, right? But the fact that you're saying it in English, like that you have some sincere meaning to it, it has to be more meaningful. It has to.
Well, I appreciate your conviction, but I don't know that everyone would necessarily agree with you.
Isn't that true then, that anybody could say it?
I know of a case where a woman was upset. She came to me and said that I wanted to say the psalm in Hebrew, in English, because my Hebrew is very poor and I can't keep up with the women who are saying Tehillim in the group. And the woman said, no, we only permit Hebrew Tehillim to be said in our group.
That leader should be shot. That's crazy.
Yes, please.
I was at that point, I was at that dilemma, starting out in terms of doing davening, and I had asked one of the rabbis who's a member, like in Montreal, based in, and he said, you speak Hebrew. If you don't understand, that's speak davening in Hebrew, even if you don't understand.
So there are two schools. There are two schools to this. I've given a series of shiurim on this a few years ago. It's been a while, so we have to review it. But I'll get to that, and Yirtzeh Hashem will go through the sources next time. Yes?
The way I solved the problem for myself, because I had no formal Hebrew education in convert, so what I started off doing was getting a really good English translation. I now use Lord Sachs.
Yes.
His English resonates with me.
Yes.
And my professional background is in English. I'm a writer and I was a journalist, and so I need the English. But I've got a really good translation, and when I finish davening in the morning, I pick one
Paragraph, yeah.
and go from Hebrew to English, Hebrew to English, Hebrew to English, and then back and forth.
Okay.
And over years, I've caught up with it. And in shul, when we're laning, I listen in Hebrew and read in English. And by now, I can do that.
Yeah.
It took a long time.
It does take a while. It takes
but
a while.
it works.
Okay. Now, let me just finish this paragraph on page 237. Yishmael brought Hebrew to the Arab countries, where it merged into Arabic. These three languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, are therefore parallel and similar in their vocabulary structure and usage. How many here speak Arabic? Anyone speak Arabic?
I really don't understand too much, but I do.
Well, it's very easy. You know, I would encourage you, if you've never studied Arabic, it's not hard to, if you know Hebrew, it's a good language to study. They currently, in many Jewish schools, let's say Yeshiva University, Stern College, they offer Arabic as one of the languages they offer, for the very simple reason. Number one, the Western world needs more Arabic speakers, because you can actually, from a career standpoint, I've told my children there are two languages that you should study from a career standpoint.
Mandarin?
Chinese, right? Mandarin, and Arabic.
Right.
Right? Chinese, Mandarin, because you can do business much more easily and listen in on what they're saying behind your back, right? When you're negotiating a deal. And number two, Arabic, because the government would always love to have more Arabic speakers to be able to translate, to be able to listen in on what's going on in the Arabic world, to be able to read the Arabic newspapers, and to know what the Arabic leaders are really saying to their people, and not what they're representing is being said in the Western media, in the English-speaking media. So the reason why I mention that is because it's relatively easy. It's one of the hardest languages among all the languages. They rank languages from level 1 to level 5. Arabic is a level 5 language as far as difficulty goes, but not if you're a Hebrew speaker, because it uses the same structure as the Hebrew language. It's a Semitic language. The three primary Semitic languages, at least the ones that are still extant today, are Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic. Aramaic is still used as a living language, but only among a small population of people. The Chaldeans, I believe the Kurds also use it, I'm not sure, but Chaldeans are a sect of Iraqi Catholics who use Aramaic in their prayer service, and sometimes even in their spoken word as well. And sometimes it's called Syriac, which is a variation of Aramaic from the Syrian area, from the area of Syria. But these are basically what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying, is that even though it's true that all of the languages got split up at the Tower of Babel, he's saying something that the Ibn Ezra says as well, that really these three languages are really from the same source. In other words, perhaps when we say that the world got divided off into 70 languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic really were part of the same language, and they just got, just like you have different dialects of the same language, Arabic and Hebrew are really different dialects of the same Semitic language. And so these three languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, are therefore parallel and similar in their vocabulary structure and usage. Nevertheless, Hebrew stands alone above the others. And now, Linda, this is just to address your point, he's going to be, from this point forward, he's going to be addressing the intrinsic superiority of the Hebrew language. Not just the historical superiority of the Hebrew language, but there's an intrinsic value. And that's where he starts on Hebrew's importance from a logical standpoint. But the introduction to that is that even though there's so much similarity in all of these three languages, nonetheless, Hebrew is superior. I believe I mentioned to you the last time we met, but I could be confusing my thoughts, I don't remember exactly, is that there is an inherent difference between Aramaic and Hebrew. Lavan spoke Aramaic, and Avraham spoke Hebrew, and Yaakov spoke Hebrew. And I mentioned to you that the other explanation of Arami Oved Avi, that an Aramean tried to destroy my father, why didn't the Haggadah just say Lavan Oved Avi? Why did it refer to Lavan as the Aramean? Like, we don't refer to Paro as the Egyptian. We don't refer to Esav as the Edomite. We say Esav, we say Paro, right? We don't refer to Bilam as the Moabite, right? Why refer to Lavan as the Aramean? And the answer is because the Aramaic language has a certain quality that really spoke to what Lavan was all about. I mentioned this to you a few weeks ago when we were learning the Parsha. I'll just review it very briefly. Lavan was externally, from all external factors, a righteous man. He believed in greeting guests. He believed in treating people ethically and kindly. But there was a certain distortion that was within him that allowed him to be able to rationalize how he could exploit his son-in-law Yaakov for 20 years and feel that he wasn't entitled to anything upon departure. And part of that had to do with his Aramean culture. You see, Aramaic is a distortion of the Hebrew language. Hebrew is pure and holy, and Aramaic is just oh so similar but slightly variant in some very subtle ways. It's like looking at a corruption of a beautiful piece of art. It's actually uglier to look at a, let's say, first-year art student's rendition of the Mona Lisa than looking at a piece of art that he makes on his own. Because when he tries to imitate something that's truly beautiful, and he just sort of messes it up just ever so slightly, that gives you that pang of pain. Do you remember reading that story? It was a couple of years ago, Patricia. There was a woman curator who, there was this very, like, invaluable piece of art of Jesus, and
Yes, and she messed it up.
she messed it up while she was trying to clean it.
She was trying to restore it.
She was trying to restore it.
It was in a church in Spain.
A church in Spain,
And
okay.
it looked just, it was a monkey, exactly.
Right.
It was terrible.
It was terrible, right. So, you know, that's what, trying to do a terrible restoration to a beautiful piece of art. It was worth millions of dollars. And she took this priceless piece of art and she just made the face look like a monkey.
And she did it out of the goodness of her soul. She wanted to do something
She was
good.
trying so hard to do something good. Well, what a disaster, right? Did you read about this? No? Okay. It's in all the news. If you remember the name of
It's in Spain somewhere.
okay, yeah,
And I think they tried to restore it,
yeah.
but people were coming to see it and leaving contributions.
Yeah,
Until the whole thing died down, and I don't know what they did.
yeah, anyway.
Yes.
Yes.
So why is it that the Gemara, which is such an integral part of the Torah, is written in Aramaic?
That's a very good question. See, it's a double-edged sword. See, Aramaic was the spoken word of the Babylonian Jew. And so you needed to have a language that was, Aramaic was the language that was spoken in the Beis Medrash, just like you and I are speaking English right now to describe Torah. The Medrash says that the reason why God exiled the Jews from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia is because he wanted them to have a language that at least would have some similarity to their original spoken word. So on the one hand, it's a Semitic tongue, it's very similar to Hebrew, it's something that they would be familiar with. But on the other hand, it's got this certain distortion quality. And that's what makes it just ever so slightly corrupt, and that's what makes it even worse. And that's the reason why Lavan is called the Aramean, is that he was so the threat that he posed to Yaakov, which was a greater threat, like the Haggadah says, it was a greater threat than Paro, it was a greater threat than Esau, is that he passed himself off for being just like Yaakov. You and I are no different from each other. Right? We speak the same Semitic tongue. No, there is a fundamental difference. I'm not distorted. I don't have that corrupted quality within me. You love and do. We're both righteous and we both practice the same ethical conduct, but you give one little knetch and that breaks the whole thing, and I don't have that. And that's why the Haggadah represents Lavan as being the greater threat than even Paro. Yes?
So why are we saying the prayer before we take out the Torah from Aron HaKodesh?
Baruch Shemay. Yeah.
In Aramaic.
Why then, and what about Kaddish?
Yeah, so...
Kaddish is said in Aramaic.
I mean, I read it, I understand it actually,
Yeah.
okay, when I read it, but it's because it's so much like Hebrew, but... So why?
So there is an explanation to this that has to do with the fact that there are certain prayers that the angels don't attend to. We talked about that a few weeks ago when we talked about this whole idea of Aramaic. So we won't go into it so much now, but understand that there's a certain quality of Aramaic that the angels will not attend to. When we want to say a very holy prayer that will go directly to Hashem and not via angels, we use Aramaic as well. But Aramaic can only be recited in a minyan for that reason. Since private prayer, you need angels to transport your words up to Hashem, the angels will not utilize Aramaic language. They'll only take Hebrew prayers or other prayers in other languages up to God. Aramaic they despise because of the corruptive quality of Aramaic that I mentioned a moment ago. Well, when we pray with a minyan, God comes down to us and we don't need the angelic intermediaries, and therefore we can pray in Aramaic.
But at Pesach, when we give the Bita K'netz, the phrase that you say that it's...
That's also Aramaic. Any kind
You say it's single.
of legal declaration that requires an understanding on behalf of the person was also composed in Aramaic. So a lot of people didn't, even in the Talmudic period, didn't know Hebrew. So they instituted a formula that they knew that every person would understand. That's why when you say the Kol Chamira after B'dikas Chametz, if you don't understand Aramaic, you're obligated to say it in English as well. Yes?
Talking about language, is it possible that we can say the name of Hashem, like in regular conversations, in another language? Because I hear that, like, when you want to say, may Hashem be with you, sometimes we say in Spanish also, even in, like, my...
Dios.
I said, that's my question also.
Vaya
I
con
always
Dios.
say, Alamak. Alamak is in Arab. Allah.
Allah. Yeah.
I always say Alamak to my family when they leave home. Sometimes I feel bad to say it because somebody told me.
Allah Ma'ak.
Yeah.
Allah Ma'ak means may God be with you.
So I don't know, can I say the name of Hashem like in regular?
Yes, you can. Now, there are poskim who say that you should not say God. You should not say the word God, because God is intrinsically holy, even in foreign languages. It's a machloket ha-poskim. There's a machlokes, there's a dispute among the authorities. But most authorities do justify saying, if I want to say God bless you, there's nothing wrong with saying it. God bless you.